folks that work in the medium that you choose to work in, and so um, searching for artists that work with beads. Um, there's few and far between. Um, and on top of that, there's not a lot of men working in that medium as well. So, I think I found you. I don't even know. I started looking up artists that worked in that medium, and you popped up, and I was just like mind blown.
Boom.
Yeah. So then, when we had your work at Moad, man, what a privilege, what a treat.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. I always appreciate hearing from you on IG when you send
Oh
me.
yeah.
Seeing your work in progress.
Always.
Yeah.
Barbara is here. We just spoke with Barbara a couple weeks ago.
Yeah. She's great. I love Barbara.
Yeah, she is amazing. So glad to have you here. All right, wonderful. So I will get us started. Folks are still logging in. I know that there's a lot of people joining us from Facebook. FYI, if you're joining us from Facebook, we can't see your chat because we're on Zoom. If you would like to switch from Facebook to Zoom so you can interact with us in live time, please visit Moad's website, www.moadsf.org /calendar, and then you can actually go in and you can join us on Zoom Live, or you guys can interact with each other on Facebook and YouTube while this is going on. I'm going to get us started while folks are still logging in. This is, like I said a little bit earlier, this is week 17, it may be 16, in the artist studio. So Moad's physical building may be closed due to the mandatory shelter in place, but we wanted to make sure that you could still get your fill of art and artists of the African diaspora. So each Wednesday at 1:00 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, you can log in to join Moad staff members as we visit with some of our favorite artists in their studios to see what they're currently working on. This is a really rare opportunity to hear from the artists directly from their studios. And we always follow these conversations with a Q&A from the audience. So as we're talking today, please feel free to use the Q&A button that you see on your Zoom screen to put in your questions. And at the last 10 to 15 minutes, we will get to those questions. Please make sure that you check our website to see which artists we have coming up. You can also go to our YouTube channel to see the past conversations, and we'll be talking about some of those. This series was made possible by generous donations by the Westwood Foundation. Moad members and viewers like you, thank you so much. We couldn't do this without you. And today's talk is co-presented with Claire Oliver Gallery in Harlem, New York. I'm going to read a few statements before we get into our conversation today. The first is that Moad stands in solidarity with Black Lives Matter. We honor and mourn the senseless murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Tony McDade, and so many others who have lost their lives at the hands of police brutality and racial injustice, including those whose names we do not know. And unfortunately, the list is growing each week. I also want to read a land acknowledgement. So as many of us are settlers, immigrants, or descendants of those who were forcefully brought to this continent, our institutions were founded upon exclusions and erasures of the indigenous peoples whose lands we are located on. With deep respect, Moad acknowledges that even in the virtual space, our people, our work, and our network servers are on the native lands, and we thank the indigenous peoples of the Bay Area who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. My guest today is the phenomenal Leonardo Benzant. Born in New York City to Dominican parents with Haitian heritage, Leonardo Benzant's practice includes painting, performance, sculpture, sound, and installation as he investigates deeply personal experiences of identity, ancestry, family, community, and spirituality. Leonardo at times metaphorically refers to his practice as urban shamanism, inspired by a character he created called, and you're going to have to help me with this, Kamarioka, the chameleon.
Kamarioka. But
Kamarioka.
I'll let you finish. I wanted to add something.
For sure. Information is drawn from the uniquely shared history of code switching, double consciousness, and multiple narratives that people of African descent have inherited and are compelled to adopt as a survival strategy for daily life. Like this common experience, Leonardo Benzant's work straddles two worlds, embodying the dynamics of being both sacred and secular. Leonardo Benzant is represented by Claire Oliver Gallery in New York. All right, let's dive in now. What did you want to say about that part?
Oh, I just wanted to add that that name was actually a name given to me when I got initiated, and so in the context of my work, I refer to urban shamanism as sort of like a character, and sometimes I loosely associate it to my sense of myself as being Kamarioka. You know what I mean? It's kind of like being. It's like the literal and the figurative aspect.
Okay.
Of something.
I love it. And I hope we get deeper into that as we go along with our conversation today. I wanted to jump in and thank you so much. I kind of sprung this on you last minute, but I found this amazing video that the Beholder put together. And so I definitely wanted to show it because I think I just love videos as a way to introduce artists for folks that they, for artists that they may not be aware of. So just give me a second here. My technology is on my side today. It's not always the case. Right.
What was it like growing up in Bushwick? Bushwick was wild. There were family vibe and sort of like community. People knew each other, people knew your kids and all that. But it was also very wild, a lot of drugs, a lot of junkies, a lot of crackheads. I think for me, I always had a sense of myself as being different. I'd be one of the kids that was like with a group of like 3 or 4 boys, and they'd be joking or telling stories, and I'd be real quiet because the stuff going on in my mind, it felt like there was no space for it because it didn't fit in with the context or the environment. It forced me to look at myself and kind of like make this decision early on, like, well, am I gonna try to fit in and conform with my environment, or am I gonna be true to myself? Am I gonna kind of like validate myself even though my environment is not making it very easy? In around 2010, when I got initiated into Palo, which is a ritual complex that involves ideographic writing, sacred. I found myself like sketching things in my notebooks, and it's like I wasn't trying to imitate what I saw in the ceremonies, but I was kind of just pulling from the flavor of it. And that's when I began doing this series that I call Signatures. I refer to that series as Afro-Spanglish because the whole title of Afro-Spanglish is kind of like just my experience of being in multiple worlds at the same time, being between Spanish and English. At a certain point in my life, like I would never have thought that I would be doing these kind of like sculptural pieces with beads and things. Like this was like the furthest thing from my mind. And then when I got involved with Yoruba, and I was in an environment where I was surrounded by a lot of objects with beads. And then I realized that the patterns mean something. The patterns have a code. The color has a code. And to me, I just see that as a form of ideography in itself. I started in 2012, and I put things inside of them that have a personal meaning, and they also have a cultural meaning. It just dawned on me at some point that African art always seems to be connected to some ritual complex. Because even if from the museum point of view, they project it to you as, well, this is sculpture, and it is sculpture, but there are these other dimensions that the modernists like Picasso and all these people, they just took at it and they extracted the form, but there's all this cultural content and meaning and symbolism, and being a person of African descent, like I was always intrigued to know more about that, as well as digging the form. In African ritual traditions, you have these dualities of energies that are constructive and also energies that are destructive. And so some people engage in ritual warfare, you know? And, but that's really not the main thing that it's about, but that's sort of the thing that gets sensationalized. It's really about healing. It's really about being in harmony with nature.
All right, thank you so much for letting me share that. I think it gives a nice sense of, you know, a nice arc of your practice, and we're definitely going to dive much deeper into that throughout this conversation. But yeah, thank you so much for letting me share that at the beginning of our conversation.
Thank you for sharing it. It's kind of strange always to see yourself.
See yourself, hear yourself.
Yeah, I think everybody feels that way in some kind of way at some point.
For sure.
It's I did that. I did what?
Yeah, and for you also, how much has your thinking around those ideas and concepts changed? Because that was back in 2016, so 4 years ago. You know, are those still the same ideas you find yourself working through, or, you know, has your consciousness of your practice and your connection to these ancient practices, have they evolved in any kind of a way?
That's a good question. I say, you know, the truth is always the truth. You know what I mean? So if you tap into a core truth for yourself, I think that remains true, you know? But of course, you keep evolving and expanding and adding and maybe revisiting something, and it's like a variation on a theme. Or now you are creating different configurations and composites that sort of create a mutation. And I guess that's part of the evolution.
I love it. And where are you at right now? Because I know someone told me that you were in Texas, and I was like, oh, okay, but you know, clearly you're not in Texas.
Yo, for the record, because so many people think I'm in Texas, I'm in New York. I'm back. Yeah, I'm in New York. My studio's currently in East New York.
Okay. All right. Yeah. and I can also hear that the accent gets a little stronger when you're back in New York also.
For sure.
Yeah. You know, I've looked at your work. Like I said at the beginning, I've just been a fan. The second that you had your show at Al Jazeera, I've just been obsessed. You have been one of my idols. As you know, I will say that I'm also an artist and I work with beadwork, and again, there's not a lot of men holding down this space. And there's also a lot of, you know, in the Western world, beadwork is considered female work, right? But when you go back to African diasporic traditions, right? It's the place of the men, and actually men were the only ones who are allowed to perform this sacred work. So when I saw your work, I was just like, wow, there's someone else, and I feel like there's a channel that not a lot of artists can tune into, that you're not only tuning into, but you're really amplifying it, and you're taking it to a whole other level. And so I'm just obsessed. This is a huge honor for me. so I'm a fanboy out for a second there.
That's cool, man. I mean, that's great. It's like you gotta receive that. You know what I mean? Because we all have things and people that we admire, or things that we appreciate, or that we connect to, or that stir us in some kind of way. You know what I mean? And it's all part of the give and take, giving and receiving flow of energy. You know what I'm saying? And it's interesting because what I was referring to in the video about being different, that's kind of what influences the choices that I make, that I guess position me in a way where someone like you could say, well, there's not a lot of dudes working with beads or whatever like that. So I get all throughout my life, there are these choices that I make based on, it's not even like I'm trying to be different. It's what I'm drawn to, and it just happens to be, oh, that's different, or that's unique, or whatever, and sometimes it's a lonely road, but it's a necessary road, because like for example, I wasn't really ever into sports. But all the boys on my block like to play sports, but I find sports boring as fucking hell. You know what I mean? I just do. But I love riding my bike, or I love going swimming, or I would go running. I like solitary things like that. Like running, swimming, riding my bike, going on a hike or a really long walk. Or for a time, I even did a little like weightlifting, or like I took a little martial arts. But other than that, like the whole team thing and getting all emotional and whatever about like a team and having an argument about my team is better than your team, and it's like voyeuristic to me. And it's also like it's great to be an athlete. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I admire the discipline and the winning spirit, the determination that it takes to develop. Like those kind of things I admire. But I guess what I'm not so into is like the people who stand on the sidelines and they instead of being in the arena and being a player, it's like this encouragement to sort of be passive and voyeuristic and just watch and kind of like admire something rather than being about something and taking action, which is what I'm more into, like what can I do today? You know what I mean? Versus turn on the channel and like be consumed by the whole day of like watching other people play. Meanwhile, they could take that to the bank and get paid. And,
exactly.
It's not doing that for me. You know what I'm saying?
I love that. And that's not something that you get to hear in the Western context, especially, and it also doesn't conform to, what we're fed as this is what it means to be a male identified person. It's within the Western context. So I love that you're putting that out there and owning it. And it's another place that I definitely find a lot of resonance with you on. And it's a rare place to find that resonance.
Also, I think that naturally we have a primal necessity to express certain kinds of energy, and I think that definitely be channeled in sports, but so much sports. Sometimes, like, I would think to myself, it's kind of a way of diverting the energy of that could maybe be used to be political or to activate social change or to use your imagination in another way that actually takes you into some other spaces. You know what I mean? But I think this culture is a lot about distraction and sort of like diverting certain types of energy that could actually be more effectively used to create change versus just being entertained. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and you know, and I think it's actually it's inspiring to hear you say that, and I think that's also, you know, in this current climate, now that everybody's living in quarantine and Black Lives Matter has finally, you know, entered the main stage. You know, it's kind of been going around since 2014. We've heard about it as a side thing, but now it's more mainstream and people are talking about it. And so you even see, you know, Kaepernick was the first one, you know, taking a knee, and poor guy, you know, gets put on the outside for doing that. But now you have baseball teams taking a knee for Black Lives Matter, and you have, you know, certain politicians, actually, not all of them, not the top office, but you know, you it's starting to have this momentum, and people are starting to, you know, realize that, you know, it's not just about the entertainment and making all the money for someone else. That you know, there has to be a cause. And so I think, you know, kind of the way you've been thinking, which even watching the video, it's like, oh, you've been thinking this way since you were a teenager. You know, that now the rest of the world is catching up with that.
I was thinking about that earlier in my car, how before Black Lives Matter, it's like Black Lives Matter.
Exactly.
They've always mattered, and they always will. You know what I mean? And it's kind of a strange reality that we need to point out something so obvious.
Oh man, talk about it. Yeah, exactly. And even to think about it, like, this has been, even that particular movement since 2014, 6 years in the making, and we haven't seen very much change. With your own practice, you know, I'm curious. You've got paintings behind you, and I know we're gonna deep dive into those later. But you know, I definitely wonder how being in quarantine and this moment that we have with Black Lives Matter, has that had any impact on your practice? I'm sure it's had impact on shows as an artist and exhibitions. But you know, has this shifted your subject matter in any kind of way, or do you feel like it's consistent for you?
Yeah, like I said earlier, the truth is the truth. You know what I mean? So it's like, if you're already on a certain trajectory, it's like, I guess I'm more of a person that I kind of connect to certain principles, and in a way, the principles are like the nucleus of something. It's like the core truth. And so when you look at life, when you look at current events, when you look at the news, or when you look at anything else in life, you can kind of make connections to those principles of truth. And you realize that the current events and the news story that's on the front cover of the newspaper is just another story, but in principle is the same thing. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, for sure.
So I kind of move in terms of like, what's the core principle of something versus, like, I don't watch a whole lot of
trends.
movies. Yeah. Yeah.
Probably healthy for you.
Yeah, because it's just more of the same stuff. It's like same story, different face. And once you see one story, you kind of know. You kind of know what's the principle behind it, and you can kind of make correlations. So you can discern a lot of things that way without having to have every single event like in your mind brought to your attention.
Which also can be maddening, especially at this moment in time.
Yeah.
I'm always interested in artists and how you alluded to it a little bit in the video that we watched at the beginning, but what was the defining moment for you where you're like, hey, I'm an artist, this is the path for me? You know, what was that moment? What what did you create at that time that made you realize, like, yeah, I'm an artist, this is the path, I'm gonna pursue that? I'm sure your family was probably not too happy about it.
Well, they weren't. They actually were very supportive. They didn't always understand it. I think, and I think that they had their concerns, like, well, you know, how's this boy gonna make a living? How's he gonna pay the rent? You know, the typical concerns. But in general, I think they were always very supportive. Like when my mother saw that I was really into painting and doing watercolors and things like that, she bought me a drafting table, and she bought me an easel, and she would give me materials to go and buy canvas. You know what I mean? Like,
wow.
Yeah, they were very supportive in that sense. And I think some parents, if they have any type of wisdom about them, they recognize when their child is determined and stubborn, and like, yeah, we're not gonna change his mind. You know what I mean? We just gotta like embrace it. But as far as when I realized, I always give the example of me being a little boy and sitting at the window and kind of like looking out the window and watching the world go by and watching everything on my block, you know, watching the kids play, watching kids ride their bike, watching junkies come down the street nodding, singing a salsa song and then going into a nod, you know. It just taking in my environment, you know what I mean? Watching so-and-so who lives across the street coming home from work, looking all greasy because he's a mechanic and whatever like that. So what I'm trying to say is that before I picked up the pen or the brush or the beadwork or whatever, it's like, for me, becoming an artist was a state of mind. It was a state of awareness. It was like an awareness or a sort of a certain type of consciousness that, or a certain way of looking at the world. And the window becomes like a metaphor for that in my life. You know, that time where I would just look out the window. But then
I love it. Developing the eye all along.
Yeah, but then when I got into high school, that's kind of where I formally was like, oh, I think this is like a path. Like in a more tangible, concrete way, where like, I think this is something that I need to be involved in. I think this is something that, you know, and at that time, I was actually sitting in my teacher from high school, Miss Saracola's class. And she, you know, she taught us how to like stretch our own canvas, and she did color wheels with us. So we were studying like color theory and whatever like that. And, you know, I hated school, you know, and I really did, you know, like Einstein, who hated school. I hated school myself. And Einstein wasn't good in math, neither was I. I mean, I could do it, you know what I mean? But I was always the last person to hand in the test. You know what I mean? Because I overthink a lot, you know, and I wait, let me review that again. You know what I mean? So when I'm sitting there in Mr. Acola's class, it was like a light went off. Like, wow, like I hate school, but I really like this class. And I like this teacher. There's a vibe about her. And I remember one particular afternoon, I was bored and I got up and I was wandering around the class and I went into her closet and she had all these magazines, Art News, Art Forum, Art in America. And I opened up to a page where they had a Franz Klein painting. And inside the article, they also had like Romer Bearden collage. There was another page that had like a de Kooning. And when I saw this, like these names were not really all that familiar to me. But when I saw it, I was like, wow, it impressed me, you know, like it made an impression on me. And I had this instinctive thing, like I have to be about this. Like this resonates with me, you know what I mean?
I love that. Yeah, I love that you had this teacher that had this impact on you. Even just introducing and having this material around, that's amazing.
Yeah. There were a lot of teachers and a lot of influential people in different ways, which I think is a composite of all the things that go into my work that have to do with life. It's not just like pulling from art, but pulling from life, pulling from so many different areas.
Well, on that note, I want to go into some of your work. So yeah, right here. So I'm kind of trying to pull through. I guess basically in the images that I pulled, I'm trying to tell a story through your work. But I would love to hear your story of these.
I want to hear your story. No, just kidding.
These images were definitely referenced in the video we saw at the very beginning. You know, and it's apparent for me. I can definitely see the ideographic references to them, but there's much more than that going on in here. And would you say, are these the earliest of your works?
Nah, these aren't the earliest. They're earlier work, but yeah, I mean, this is stuff I did in 2011, but I've been making art ever since I was a little kid. You know what I mean? Like I have stuff.
Oh yeah. Or these are some of your earliest publicly exhibited works, I guess, like gallery represented.
Yeah, you might say that. but there are others that were earlier, but they're really not out there.
Okay. They're a little harder for me to find. Can you kind of walk through some of these? And you know, you don't have to go into the deep details, but you know, what are the stories? What are the thoughts and the feelings that were going on for you as you were creating these?
Yeah, I specifically remember being in my Brooklyn apartment. And I had these large sheets of paper on the wall, and I had a lot of energy and emotion around having been initiated, and I was excited about it, and I felt very connected to a certain Congo sort of spirituality, and I just kind of like fell in love with what's called the filmas or the patipembas. Patipemba is a key Congo word that loosely means power sign. So these power signs in the context of a ritual are a way of communicating with the spirits, but it's also a way for the ritual expert known as the Ngangulero to communicate with, you know, everybody that's present. And everybody understands it at different levels depending on their level of initiation or their level of knowledge. And I was kind of connecting that experience with also my Haitian heritage, and in voodoo, well, yeah, the system of voodoo and the system of Palo Mayombe, which is Afro-Cuban, they both share like the same roots. They all can trace these two systems of ritual can trace their roots back to the Central Congo in what's called the Lemba society. And that's why when you look at Haitian Veve, which is their sort of like sacred ground drawings that you see in their rituals, and the Patipemba that you see in Congo Afro-Cuban rituals, they have like some similar vocabulary, you know, like you'll find variations of the Dikenga, which is a Congo cosmogram, which usually is in the form of a circle with a cross in the center. And Robert Farris Thompson refers to it as the 4 moments of the sun. And it kind of represents the stages of life and death and rebirth and immortality. And so there's just, the arrows represent, you know, energy moving in different directions. It represents the wind. There are different shapes in here that kind of look like blades or shanks or machetes or whatever. And that kind of refers to the mbele, which is a Kikongo word for machete, which, you know, is all sorts of symbolism. And I have motifs in here that have to do with the moon and plants that are used in ritual. The colors are more like, you know, my feeling, but it's also based on being informed of certain things.
Yeah, the colors definitely having spirit and certain energies that are associated with them. And I think, you know, for me, I when I see these paintings right here, I can see the immediate connection with probably what you're most well known for, at least for me. And I think, you know, in just a Google search is your beadwork, your beaded sculptures. But, you know, I think it's really nice to see this 2-dimensional, you know, earlier works, and then I you know, I can visually see a deep connection between them. They're not, you know, even the material that you're using, the dimensions that you're using are different. There is a connection. You have a language that you're working through.
Yeah. The sculptures are definitely ideographic. Anyway, that's an earlier.
And I loved it, and I was like, I also just I don't even know if you knew I was gonna pull this image, but I just had to also like watching the progression.
Are you an investigator? No.
I love watching the progression of your work also through your hair and your hair links, and for me that was also kind of an indicator of like, this is where he is in the stages of his work, and you know, this is where he is right now. But I'm very fascinated by this piece, and I believe, was this also the piece in the video that we watched behind you? Yeah. And was this your first foray into working with the fabric, or were you kind of, you know, doing this all along?
Yeah, I've always worked with fabric, and fabric has always been a part of my life, and it's part of like my family history. And but this is definitely one of those seminal pieces for me, anyway, where I kind of had a breakthrough into object making in a way that felt very personal. It feels like my own language, but at the same time, it's inspired by quilts and African textile. it's almost like three-dimensionalized conversation with African textile and Egungun masquerade, and the dangling forms are like evocative of charms and pod-like roots and organic things, you know, that you find in nature. And inside of each of these forms, I had placed different objects that were symbolic and personal. And as I'm sewing and I'm stuffing these forms with different things, it's very meditative, it's very ritualistic. It felt in a lot of ways like I was conjuring, you know? It was a very deep process. And this piece took about 9 months to make. And for me, the number 9 is symbolic. It always reminds me of like a womb or a woman's pregnancy process. And that's sort of the feeling that I had when I was making this piece. Like I was, you know, you go through a lot of stuff, just like I'm sure a woman goes through different stages, and giving birth to something is not always an easy thing.
Not at all.
I don't think being born is easy. You know,
no.
We probably don't remember because we were babies, but I think being born was, it can be, when you think about it, it's traumatic. It's like you're moving from one space into another. It's quite a transition. And that's sort of like what this piece felt like. It was like giving birth to not only the work, but to another way of experiencing myself as an artist.
You know, also, I'm really interested to know if when you switched to object making, were there other life events happening for you? Like a little while ago, we spoke with Bisa Butler, and you know, she talked about her transition from being a painter, which, you know, in the West is really, especially if you're working in oil, as the highest form of art that there is, really, right? It's the most prestigious.
Right.
But she also had a life event happening, you know, for her that also correlated with 9 months. I'm wondering if that was a similar process for you.
Yeah. First of all, I think all that hierarchical stuff is BS. But
definitely.
But I get it. I understand it. I'm aware of it, and I think that that's part of what I was grappling with in this kind of work, where I was kind of affirming that this is art, and it is high level art, and it's like, and that's part of the scale. It's like my intention is to project things that we in the West might normally think of as decorative or whatever like that, or jewelry or design. You know what I mean? My intention was to project it in such a way where it's like, this is beyond that. You know, it's and yet all those things that I mentioned are art in and of themselves from an African perspective. If you look at it from a Western perspective, then sure, it's just decoration, and some people may not be aware of how, like, the patterns in the African textile, you know, have names, and those patterns are like part of the oral history, and they're associated with all sorts of like philosophy and cosmology and ritual, and they sometimes let you know where something is placed on you know, in the environment. It's in other words, the patterns become a sort of mnemonic device that triggers memory in connection with oral history. You know what I mean? And culture and ritual and all these other things. So it's very complex. And for me, what was going on with me at the time was that, you know, my daughter was born, and it was pretty hard to, it's hard to paint while you're trying to like hold the baby and but with this, it's like I could place my daughter on the bed and watch her while I sit next to her, and I could sew. And if I have to stop, I could put the sewing, whatever I'm sewing, down, and I can easily, fluidly go in and out of creating while multitasking, which is what a lot of moms do.
Yep.
I was the dad. I was the dad taking care of, you know, not the whole time. I mean, the mom would always would take care of the baby too. But I'm just speaking of times where I had to take care of my daughter.
Yeah. You're not having to go to it.
It was just another way of creating that I just found it hard to paint with the way that a baby kind of, or a child, impacts your life.
Exactly. And I don't know if I got the title of this one correct, but I definitely wanted to. I found this one online, and I don't know if this was actually Bambula, also, because you have another piece with that title. Okay.
Yeah. That's, Bambula refers to. Oh, did you have a question? I just.
Oh no. Go for it.
No, I was gonna say that Bambula refers to the ancestral memory that's embedded in our subconscious, and a lot of times when I'm working with beads, I feel like I'm speaking in codes. You know, the beads themselves are like codes, and there's this place where my mind kind of thinks of these things as ancient, but also very futuristic and contemporary, in the sense that when you talk about digital things, there's codes in that as well. You know, so it's this, I find this correlation between the ancient and the futuristic, and between the digital and the biological, because when I look at these pieces, sometimes it reminds me of DNA or chromosomes, or the way that I wrap the forms in a spiral.
Yeah, which is wild, and the process of beading, like, you don't just go find stringed beads and just attach them to your work. You string them yourself, right?
Yeah, I string them myself, but my mother helps me with a lot of the strands. Sometimes my daughter's mom helps with other aspects of the work. My mother definitely helps. My father sometimes helps. But yeah, a lot of it I do myself. I create long strands that extend all the way across the room. And sometimes they wrap around the room several times.
Wow.
Yeah.
So the patterns that we're seeing on here, as you're stringing them, you're not necessarily sure what it's going to look like when it's attached to your final piece.
No, but I have a good sense in my mind. I think that's a visionary quality that I have. Like, I can see it in my head.
I love that. I'm going to encourage folks, because in usual fashion, I get carried away in the conversation, and our time goes really quickly. I definitely want to encourage folks to drop questions into the Q&A tab that you see at the bottom of your screen, so that I can get into those. And we'll go on until I see some questions pop up in there. So if you have any that you want me to address, please, or if you want Leonardo to address those, please put them in there. I'm jumping into time again. I'm playing a little with the back and forth, the past, the future, because I think you allowed me to just go in and pull images that really spoke to me. And so
I did that on purpose.
I love it.
Because it's like somebody could walk into the room and you already know what's your favorite piece or whatever. But sometimes it's interesting for other people to make selections, because then you can sort of like tailor your movement, and there's like a thing of being in sync in that way. It kind of facilitates being in sync in a way.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense, but
for sure, and for me, I think with all the pieces, is I'm looking for how they all connect with one another, and you know, I think even, and we definitely will get to your latest piece, but you know, for me, the connection on how you got from, you know, your earliest work and how all that connects into what you're currently working on is always a thing that I'm looking for. And
yeah.
so I think as you start to move into these figures with this, but with still being abstract, I can still see the sculptural qualities in here. I see there's a certain color palette that you use, whether it be beads, whether it be painting, or whatever media that you're using. I think that there are certain colors that you're attracted to that I see throughout throughout your work over the last decade. So just this one was just really interesting to me because it's very different.
I did those when I was doing my residency in Texas around 2016, 2017. And yeah, for me, color is very important, and I almost always think of color as being rhythmic, and the visual equivalent of rhythm is, as you know, pattern. So I'm always finding correlations between sound and visual, and color kind of evokes musical notes. It evokes different things, definitely sensations or feelings. But yeah, definitely rhythm. And a lot of times when I'm thinking about color, I'm thinking about chroma or temperature, or like sometimes, like when you study, for example, Yoruba color theory, or how the Yoruba approach color, it's like colors have different temperatures that are associated with different temperaments. So let's say there's an Orisha or an avatar or a spirit that is of a cool temperament, that Orisha may be represented in a white cool color or a blue color. You know what I mean? But if the temperament of that spirit is fiery and violent, then you know, you may see that there's a lot of use of like orange and reds and maroons. You know what I mean?
And I love that, and I think that you make a strong connection with that through all of your works, and that's one of the things that I think for me, that's one of the things that it doesn't matter what medium you use, and I understand you were even in a film.
Yeah,
I didn't pull that one.
Yeah, I also think of color in terms of quantum mechanics or quantum physics, in that it's a frequency. It evokes a certain vibration. You know, it evokes energy. It evokes a state of mind. It's just, I actually wrote something that if I could reference, if you don't mind.
Please.
Yeah, so you know, I do these things in the morning where I write in my laptop. I have like a journal on my laptop, and so I printed this out, this little excerpt, because, let me see. So I wrote here, it's so eerie how narrative exists on one plane and visual facts or visual dynamic and language exists on a plane all its own. You feel certain sensations from seeing, and images evoke things that manifest meanings or feelings that are distinct from whatever the story is. So okay, let me go on this. Let me finish this part. It says, one, it's like two different realities coexisting. I'm referring to the visual language and then the more word-oriented way that people perceive story. You know what I mean? So it's like when we look at images, a lot of times automatically, because we live in a society that's word dominated, word oriented, it's like in our heads, I think we tend to think of things in a very illustrational manner, in a way like when you look at something, okay, well, this is a bottle of water. Though this is my iPhone, this is an Apple, but then there's another dimension to images that's beyond words, that's beyond names, that's beyond the story. It transcends all that. And I guess I try to point to that space of feeling, of sensations, of energy, of vibration. It's a lot like the difference between how we learn in the West, where in the West, you sit in a classroom and somebody lectures to you. Whereas in an African setting, traditional setting, you learn by doing, you learn by experiencing, you learn by participating in a ritual. You become immersed in something, and there are all these multi-sensory experiences that become part of the experience of learning. You know what I mean? And I think that goes over our heads when we too quickly try to ascertain, well, what does it mean? In the sense of looking for a word explanation for something rather than just being open and experiencing it.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. There is it is a very Western idea to just be like, what does this mean? Boom, I got it. Now I can move on. And I think art definitely has what's special about art is you need to sit with it, and over time, new meanings will come through for you, and it may change over time for you as well.
Ironically, in music, we do have this tendency of perceiving things in that way or experiencing things in that way. Because like when you listen to Coltrane, it's abstract. There's no lyrics. For the most part, it's abstract. But for some reason, we have more of an inclination to be able to feel things sonically. But when it comes to visual things, we think that you think you can't sit in front of a Mark Rothko and like cry. You know what I mean? It's kind of unheard of for a lot of people because it goes right into the head. You know what I mean? But anyway.
I love that. I love that reference. Yeah, because I mean, definitely a Rothko, which I think is the same with your work. Right now, I'm presenting it on a screen, so it has a feeling, and folks who haven't had the privilege of being able to sit with the work may think that they understand it, and you get a very different vibe and feeling and emotion when you're standing there and sharing space with it. And for me, this is a nice segue into the two questions that we have in the Q&A. And so, yeah, I think I just kind of jumped up here because Barbara Earl Thomas asks, our beautiful friend in the Northwest here, how do you feel about people touching the work as it invites touching?
I love it. because when I'm making these pieces and my work in general, there is a very tactile quality, and that's very personal for me because of my history. Like I'm somebody that craves touch. Like touch is very important to me, and also when I look at African traditional art, a lot of times it's visual, but it's also tactile. Think of quilts, think of beadwork, think of a lot of even contemporary Black artists or modern Black artists. Like when you think of Thornton Dial, like his assemblages, it's very tactile. it's kind of something that's in the artistic DNA of our ancestors. I think, I could be wrong, but it also has a personal reason for being in my work. And so,
yeah, I love that. How does your gallery feel about that, or museums even?
No, of course, they're not going to be happy about it, but I understand the inclination, and I think that's why I love having kids come to an opening, because kids will do things that really expresses how the work is affecting them by the body language, by their inclination to touch the work or whatever, the curiosity. It's like all of these things that we're not supposed to do are kind of like antithetical to what art is actually eliciting in us to feel and to want to do. You know what I mean?
And on our second question, I think this piece that I pulled up, the Ngonda magic in the language of circles and spirals, for a couple of reasons, I really see the connection between the ideograms and a piece like this. And then we have a question from Patricia Keynes, who loves your beaded work, like most of us.
Oh, thank you.
And you know, she says that also when she looks at it, it feels like the ancestral past and present both meet. Do all of your beaded works items include something inside? You mentioned that a little bit earlier, and so, you know, she was interested in knowing a little bit more about that connection of what's inside. And you've spoken about, I mean, we have a description right here of part of what's inside, and you make these particular choices. And I'm interested to hear, you know, why. I'll just jump right in it because we're getting lower on time. The Caucasian mannequin head, that's inside of there, and it also looks like a baby doll. You know, can you talk about these choices?
Yeah. It's kind of partly just responding to what's around me, and well, oh, here's my daughter's doll that somebody gave her that I don't really like her playing with, because growing up I wanted her to have dolls that look more like her, because I think that's an important it establishes an important relationship, you know, of like even me as a boy, like I needed to see images of myself, but all I would see on TV were people that didn't look nothing like me, didn't look nothing like my uncles or whatever like that. So it's kind of a political thing to put in my work. I'm saying something. I'm not exactly sure what it's saying, but it's something to the effect of like me acknowledging that this is the material culture that's available, that is kind of sending a message to me as a Black person, to a Black girl as a Black girl, and this is what's available, and it's sort of my desire to transform it and to Africanize it. But it's also speaking on the fact that a lot of times us as colonized people, we take a lot of foreign material culture and we usually Africanize it. I mean, jazz is, for example, made up of like all these European instruments, but how we make it swing is very Black, is very African. So it's kind of like a metaphor to how we take all of these things that come from our colonizers and our oppressor, and we turn it on its head, and we transform it, and we Africanize it.
Yeah, I think the work also
ritual, and different ideas related to like ritual.
I'm obsessed. I love it. The piece also feels very jewelry-like. Is that as opposed to some of your pieces that feel more strictly sculptural? This one feels, you know, I could see it. I know that it's a gigantic scale. But, you know, if it were shrunk down, it could be a necklace. Is that an intentional connection there?
Yeah. When I first started working with the beads, I actually how it started out was like my daughter's mom. Well, she's a jewelry designer, and she has incredible taste, and she had this book called World of Necklaces. And in this book, you have jewelry pieces from Africa, Oceania, Native American pieces, and at the time she was making earrings with beads and things like that. And at some point, I kind of joined her because I wanted to make some money on the side. And but then I started to think, well, damn, like, what if I magnify the scale and sort of approach this like in a serious artistic manner? Like, would I be able to transform it from something that's considered low art and project it into something that's like high art? And so, but again, these are artificial hierarchies, because
exactly.
when I look at jewelry, I think a lot of times when it's really good jewelry, a lot of times I think this is a little miniature sculpture, you know what I mean? And the thing about indigenous jewelry and African-based jewelry is that, like Western fine art, it has a lot of metaphors and symbols and meanings, and it's very complex and deep. You know, all that it means and all that it connotes. So it's not just a jewelry piece.
Exactly. It's not just for decoration. It has a lot more meanings than that.
Not at all.
I am quickly running out of time here. I want to just jump to what you're currently working on right now. Sorry to skip all this. This is the piece you had at Moat that I got to spend a lot of time with. I miss having that in the galleries. But I wanted to jump, you know, as a kind of a concluding thing to the piece that you have behind you, so we get to see it on multiple levels right here.
Yeah.
And this one to me feels, I do see the connections, but it also feels like a very different direction stylistically than what I have seen from you.
Yeah, it is different. And I think there is a connection, not an obvious one, but this, before the sculpture, like, let me put it like this. I never thought I'd be making beaded sculptures at one point, you know, because at one